So each of you are coming at this in some ways from different spaces in your work, in your organization, in your personal life, but there's some common threads here for all of us. So I wanted to invite you to speak about decolonization from these positions. You know, you are facilitators, you're conveners, researchers, educators, community workers, also family members. And so considering the question, how can we make sure that those voices that are traditionally the most oppressed are being heard? Bringing that into the center of this conversation as well. So Andriane, we'll start with you. What are some of the key takeaways to overcome the challenges regarding community engaged research in the global development sector from the Next Gen program? Some questions that come to mind is it possible to nurture a conducive knowledge partnership ecosystem going forward? And on a little bit of a different thematic is how can academics and civil society organizations establish fair and mutually beneficial research processes?
Thank you, Kim, for the multiple questions. I'm going to try to respond to as many of them, and we can always have conversation in the Q&A period and open up to all later. So the way I see how do we give voice to the most oppressed. So in my perspective and with the experience that I had in the last few years in the context of knowledge production, my sense is that community-based research partnerships are an instrumental way to decolonize knowledge. So it means that we need to involve students, indigenous communities, traditional knowledge keepers, community and academic leaders in action-oriented research project. So in my perspective and from what I learned, this is the best way to shift the power imbalance and address local needs and make sure that all the different stakeholders are sitting in the same place when we are producing the knowledge and the research process. There's actually a great paper from some of the leaders in this field that was published recently. So as part of the special issue, Walter Lepore, but all Rendem Tamdun, they are leader in that sector. But if I go back to what is for me the starting point to decolonize the way we do these sorts of research partnership, I think we all need to ask ourselves a few questions before entering into these sort of partnership. So both academic and those working for CSO needs to think about who produces research and how. Even more than that, who produces knowledge? So concretely, this forces you to question the way you engage in those sort of partnership depending on your position. So who can speak about findings? Who owns research data? How engaging and empowering is the research process itself for those involved in the knowledge production? How could we make sure that knowledge users are also recognized as knowledge producers? How can we set up a research project and protocol which gives those we call the participants or the research object a key role not only as knowledge users, but as people who can influence the research from the beginning? And this is what we've been trying to do with the Research with Guelph, and I will share a bit later how we did that. But I want to go back to one portion of your question, Kim, about what we've learned from Next Gen. So I want to share maybe briefly a few challenges and acknowledgement that we need to keep in mind when we want to do these sorts of like equitable collaboration and partnership, because we need to acknowledge that we're coming from very different perspectives and how the reality, the root of our realities are quite different. There are some power differentials, which could be institutional, financial, or symbolic. Just the questions of who is expert in the field, who owns the knowledge and who produces knowledge is a big one. But also more concretely, when you do research collaboration, who manages the grants? Who owns the data? Who access to them? Who is invited to speak to talk about those data? Who is considered the expert when talking about the findings? So very important to start thinking about not being extractive when we do this sort of collaboration and find a place and a powerful place for all those involved, but at all the steps, not only in the data collection process. We also need to acknowledge that there's varying degrees of stability in funding and financial status, but also different skill sets when you have these sort of collaboration and partnership, that we work on different timelines, on funding cycle, on reporting period. So just acknowledging all of this from the beginning is super important. So you can start like identifying what might be those struggles along the partnership process. If I maybe move directly to a few very concrete examples of how you do this concretely when you're having these sort of partnership. So I'm going to talk about the study that we have as per Change with a research group at the Guelph University. So we are working with Andrea Paras, who is participating in the panel today, Craig Johnson and John Michael Davis. So we took a few different steps, but I'm going to start with the first one, which might seem obvious, but unfortunately, a lot of partners working together are not doing this. This is the importance of developing an MOU or a partnership agreement, which really lay out some of the key questions of your partnership. So not only the financial aspect of a collaboration, but more importantly, the partnership aspect. So what are the mutual benefits? What are the desired outcomes from the research itself, but most importantly from the partnership, which may be much beyond the research itself. So is there any cultural difference or organizational culture that should be acknowledged when you're entering into these sort of collaboration? What are your expectations in terms of data collection, storage, access, use? What is the shared decision-making process at each stage of the project? So does everyone needs to be involved and consulted for everything at each stage? Maybe it's not realistic from the community perspective. Maybe they don't have that time, they don't have those capacities, they don't have those resources. So acknowledging the potential difference in availabilities, capacities, resource, but also, so how do we want to communicate about the research? How do we talk about it? How do we talk about the finding? What is the role of each stakeholders in the dissemination? So does some of the community members want to be co-authors? Do they want to have this active role? Do they want to publish like blog article or anything? So they could increase their reach, their influence as part of being part of this project. There are some wonderful tools that are out there, such as a template memorandum of understanding for mutually beneficial research that I will be happy to share. I see, Kim, that you're making a sign, so maybe I can wrap up in 30 seconds. Yeah. So very briefly, I will talk maybe about just the next step that is important when you're done with this partnership portion, which is in terms of the research protocol itself, and how do you create opportunities for all participants. For us, this meant creating an advisory committee, which representative from the community who could, in our case, it's small and medium organization in the Canadian global development sector. So giving them a space so they could influence not only at the later stage, but at a very early stage, the research question and objective. It's also about using methodology that will allow the community to validate findings and contribute to the analysis. So not just be the knowledge user who will at the end receive the findings, but who can actually influence it. So there are a few others, but I will stop here so we can probably discuss more later on. Thank you.
Wow, Adrienne, there's so much to say. I'm sure that this is like a massive checklist that even if we're not researchers, even if we're running partnerships between CSOs, or imagining for many on this call today that are thinking about what is the relevance to all of these questions for partnership agreements in the global south or in Indigenous communities. And so it's so relevant. We've been grappling with these issues for such a long time, even at OCIC, but not in the depth that you're discussing here, I feel, from the work that we've tried. So this is a great inspiration, and I'm looking forward to you directing us more as you speak about how to find these details and the examples, the case studies.